Well, welcome everybody to our online program on addiction and recovery from the Sunshine Coast Health Center up here in Powell River, British Columbia. And our series, topic for our series this time is to understand that addiction operates at what Dr. Wong would call these fundamental levels of motivation. You probably know that Dr. Wong's research underlies a great deal of the program, the therapy program we conduct here at Sunshine Coast. And this idea is most noticeable in the works of talented people who have written for us, and there's some filmmakers as well, but written about their experiences of addiction. So people like Eugene O'Neill, the great Nobel Prize-winning alcoholic writer, whose one of his main themes was to understand why he was an alcoholic. But there are other people. Malcolm Lowry wrote one of the greatest novels of the 20th century called Under the Volcano, and it's all about an alcoholic consul. There are other people such as Thomas De Quincey, considered probably the great-granddaddy of all the drug writers. He wrote this book called Confessions of an English Opium Eater, and various other people along the way. Dylan Thomas was a very well-known poet who was an alcoholic. And so these people who wrote about particularly alcoholism, because that's the main thing that people with addictions write about, they gave us this inside view into what it is like to be an alcoholic. And they give us a depth to their understanding about, what is the actual experience like? What are the details involved? And a lot of this we don't actually find in, for example, our mainstream ideas of what addiction is all about, which generally come from medicine and psychology. In fact, I've always wondered about if Eugene O'Neill or Malcolm Lowry or Thomas De Quincey were to come to us and say, hey, I'm an alcoholic, I need help. Like, what kind of therapy would we give these people, right? Because our mainstream therapies are things like relapse prevention. So here we have people talking about this profound experience they have through being an alcoholic, and we're giving them tools of relapse prevention. Or maybe motivational therapy, probably the most studied therapy now in the addiction field. And it's intended, for example, to help people become aware of this conflict within them of wanting to continue using, yet at the same time wanting to stop, what the psychologists call cognitive dissonance. But really, how much help is that going to be to someone who's providing us with this very deep understanding of addiction that is operating really at the fundamental levels of what it means to be human? So anyway, I thought we'd take some time on this online series to look at 4 good thinkers who have actually told us a great deal about their experiences in addiction. And the first one, Eric Clapton. And Eric Clapton is a very interesting fellow, and he gives us this detailed account in his autobiography. And basically, for the first half of the book, he's in active addiction. Then he talks about going to treatment, and then returning to treatment because he relapsed, and then what life is like now. And it's very interesting because if you read between the lines of Clapton's book and you start understanding the differences in his life, you see this profound change. So I'll give you one example: music. So in active addiction, he looks at himself as a musician, as, he's a big star, right? And he's wealthy, and he's doing some goofy stuff, and he's hanging out with the Beatles and all these big names, but you don't really get this deep sense of what music means to him other than these sort of superficial things. Yes, it's made him famous, made him a lot of money, lets him hang out with some interesting characters. But then after he recovers, is much different interpretation he has of his music. And he talks about his music as healing people who suffer. And this is wildly different than in the early days when he was in active addiction. In the later, after he's in recovery for a few years, he now sees healing as this key point, and he's gonna help people overcome suffering, specifically through the music. So this is a really interesting thing. Like he's got this new purpose, this new mission, and he's attaching his life to something way beyond himself, as helping other people. So it's that idea then that of this deep change and how he's interpreting his music, and it signifies that something's going on for Clapton. This is not merely a matter that he kept out of the bars, or it's not a mere matter of abstinence. There's something much deeper going on for him. In fact, he even talks about relationships, and while he was in active addiction, he said he was never quite sure if people cared about him as a human being. Yet in recovery, he says very clearly in the last chapter, he says, I can now say with complete honesty that I am happy. And the reason he's happy is because he now knows he's surrounded by people who care for Eric Clapton as a human being. So it's an interesting take from Eric Clapton. It got very little to do with motivation or relapse prevention or addiction as a disease or any of those things. It's more about this more human stuff about relationships, about what he's doing on this planet. At any rate, that's it for this episode, and we'll be back next time with another subject on our understanding of addiction at this deep level of fundamental motivations.